Hello and welcome to Old Guys Who Like Old Comics. Today I am lucky enough to be interviewing Michael T. Gilbert here in his home.
Thank you, sir.
Let's take it back to the beginning. In the beginning there were comics.
Yes.
What were some of your favorite comics as a young person?
Well, when I was very young, Superman, Super Batman, those things here.
Right on.
Back in the late 50s.
Copy that.
I remember when I was very young, my grandmother would give me comics. She would go out and she was doing volunteer work at the hospital, in Montefiore Hospital in the Bronx, and would bring me some of the things that they gave to the kids. And I remember asking her to see if she can see this comic I just saw advertised, Hot Stuff.
Oh, really? Okay.
Even then, I liked anything with horror and
Right.
like superhero things and science fiction, strange adventures, and I loved the Marvel monster comics that were coming out.
Oh, right.
Tales of Suspense, Strange Tales, and things like that.
Oh, okay. Was she able to track down the Hot Stuff for you?
She was able to get a coverless copy of Hot Stuff, so I was
Okay.
thrilled to get it, even though it wasn't that issue.
Right. Now, as a young person, were you okay with coverless comics?
Oh yeah, anything, just as long as I got comics.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, when I was a kid, they had the farmers market, which would be they had a whole bunch of downscale things, stores and storefronts and whatnot inside this big thing here, and there was a guy who sold comic books, and
Right.
he had a whole stack of these things with 3/4 covers, the same
Oh,
sort
right.
of thing.
Yeah. Nice. When you were young, did you have friends who shared this passion with you, or were you a singular reader? Did you?
Yeah, I had a friend across the street who had some things like the first Justice League and
Oh, yeah?
it had just come out.
Right,
It was a new
right.
comic, and things like that. And when I went to school, we would trade comics before school.
Right,
So
exactly.
you had to be very circumspect about it, otherwise you get in trouble with the teacher.
Oh, yeah. I've had more than a few disappear.
Yes.
You know,
Well, I remember that I had one time where I must have been 9 years old or something, and some kid in the class had the World's Finest comics. It was a Dick Sprang issue. It was the Duplicate Man, as a matter of fact.
Right.
Well, she found him, grabbed it from him, and ripped it in half, threw it in the garbage can, and I waited till after he left, and I taped the Duplicate Man together,
Right.
which I still have, and decades later, got it signed by Dick Sprang.
Really? Oh,
Yes.
that's fantastic. What did he think of the story?
Well, I don't know if he... Oh, yeah, he enjoyed hearing about that.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Very nice guy, very nice guy.
When did you start illustrating?
Well, I was doing it when I was a kid, just
Right.
drawing pictures of things. I think the first comic, my first attempts at doing comic book stories was probably when I was about 14 or 15. And I think I was inspired when Harvey Comics came out with 2 giant-size issues of one of the Spirit,
Yes,
and
yes.
one of Fighting American at the same time, 1966. And I was just in love with that stuff. It was just, it was just reprinted from, 10, 20 years earlier. But it was just brilliant stuff. Funny, superhero, horror.
Right. Now, that's interesting. Now, that was your first experience with Eisner?
No, I'd seen Eisner a little bit before that. They had some IW reprints, unauthorized reprints or semi-authorized reprints.
Right.
They came out from the late 50s to I think it's ended in 1964. But I had seen a couple of issues of the Spirit there, and I fell in love with it.
Right.
Also.
Well, that obviously got its hooks into you.
Yeah, very
because
early.
as we would later see, you would develop the Wraith.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, not only did fans like it, but Eisner himself contacted you and told you he enjoyed it?
Well, I had written this was about 1978, and I had just finished the Wraith series, and I saw Will had done his graphic novelette, The Contract with God.
Right.
And I sent him a fan letter about it, telling him how much I enjoyed it. and I sent him a set of the Wraith, and I said, I hope you don't think I'm ripping you off.
Right, right.
It was my funny animal version of the Spirit, and he liked it, and he was very, he gave me some praise, and I felt, it's just terrific that to make that contact, and he said he'd like to see my stuff from time to time.
Right. Oh, yeah. It's amazing when creators take the time to talk to up-and-coming creators and, give them a little boost, a little pat on the shoulder. It really goes a long way.
He did a little sketch of the Spirit on the bottom of the
Really?
thing, so
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah, and we kept in touch over the years, and I've been into his studio a few times. And
right. Didn't you contribute to a Spirit?
Yeah, there was something called the Spirit Jam back in 1981, I guess.
Right.
And it was like 36 people did part of a Spirit story. We each drew sort of a round-robin version.
Right.
So I did a 3-page version of that, which I think helped me get my Elric job with when Craig Russell saw that story.
Right.
He was impressed, and I thought, there's a guy who might be able to work on Elric.
Now, you had begun work in underground comics?
Yeah.
Okay, and that was New Paltz?
New
was
Paltz.
where you're first?
Yeah, because I was going to State University at New Paltz, and my first published works were self-published. My university was the school paper was going to be putting out its own comic book. It was going to be called New Paltz Comics. And I had done 2 or 3 stories for the thing, and I did a cover for it, and they decided to spend the money on a fireworks display at the end of the school year.
Right.
And I was so pissed that I said, okay, I'm going to take I went up there, took the negatives out, and started searching for a printer, which I never in a million years would have thought that I'd be doing a publisher
right.
kind of thing here. And found one, and they published it. We had the negatives all shot already, so that helped with the price and everything.
Oh, right, right.
And then I had 4,000 copies of New Paltz Comics #1, and I'm knocking on doors at my university trying to sell it.
Oh, right,
50 cents a
right.
pop
Here's
in
that.
19...
Yeah, remember the fireworks display?
Yes.
Now you pay for it. As far as underground comics goes, did you meet interesting people while you were producing underground comics? Because in my experience, whenever I read an underground comic from the 70s, and I crack it open and I start to look at it and I see the amount of time and energy that some of these creators put into these books to disappear almost from the sands of time, creators that would put all of themselves into a book and then just not have much come of it. Did you meet any creators when you were in the underground movement that disappeared?
Well, I met a lot of underground cartoonists.
Right.
I had been living in New York, and I had been trying to break into DC and Marvel and Warren Publications, Creepy and Eerie.
Right, right.
Didn't have any luck. Came close with Warren, but didn't do it. And around '74, decided to see if I could move to California and see if I could break into the underground comic scene, which I did. And it was a kind of crazy thing because I only had like $300 or $400 to my name.
Right, right.
I had 4 duffel bags of my stuff and went with this old
3-pack
bus.
full of New Paltz comics.
Yes.
Hey, at the very least, you could sleep under them.
Exactly. They can burn for heat.
Yeah, exactly.
But then I started getting a little bit of work here and there.
Right.
And I did see people like my friend Larry Rippey, who was a lesser-known cartoonist, but he had a nice, humorous style. And he was living with, renting an apartment from Trina, who was there, Trina Robbins.
Right, right.
So I got to see her. Leslie Garbaga was living there, another cartoonist I saw. Later on, I would see, Larry introduced me to Roger Brand, who was pretty fascinating. He did real pulp comics, and he did some things for Wits End Comics. But
okay.
he was one of these guys that had this real drinking problem,
Right.
for years, and he was drinking cocaine and this and that here. Eventually, died of that kind of stuff in his early 40s, late 30s, something like that. But he was a real wealth of font of knowledge about comic history. He was really into that. And so we went to his apartment, and he would find old comic books, and he would make files. He would find old comic books with Frazetta, and we'd cut out the Frazetta stories and put them
copy
in this
that.
thing here.
Right.
These incredibly valuable comics.
Yeah, right.
They were valuable even then. But he was afraid that he would get tempted to sell the comic books.
Yeah, right.
But by doing this, they wouldn't be worth anything except to him.
Right, right.
And they were great, and so that was fascinating. I once saw Crumb sitting at some cartoonist meeting and never spoke to him or anything.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, I saw a number of people.
Well, usually you have to be a pretty well-built lady to
Yes,
get his attention. So, but.
It doesn't hurt.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
We actually had a thing called a group of cartoonists that we got together when I was in San Francisco. Called they weren't the underground cartoonists. We were the ground under cartoonists.
Oh, right. right on.
We were the people who were trying to break into the underground comics.
Right. Copy that. Yeah, that's really cool. It's just like I find that the sense of community in groups like that is just as interesting as the work they produce a lot of the time. It's just the behind the scenes stories, what doesn't make it onto the page.
Yeah.
It's just like a lot of times folks love to hear those stories because it gives you a little insight into the creator and what the world was like back then.
Yeah, well, it was kind of fascinating because this was about 1975, 1976, and the heyday of the underground comics had been in the late 60s and 71, 72.
Right.
And then there was all these obscenity busts, and suddenly nobody was publishing underground comics anymore, very few of them. So I was there sort of getting a little bit of the leftovers at the end there.
Right, copy that.
But there was still a lot of energy to the thing.
Now, Super Duper Comics number 3.
Mm-hmm.
That was where you discovered
Mr.
a
Monster.
certain Mr. Monster.
The Golden Age of Mr. Monster. It
Right.
was at New York Comic-Con, the Suling Con in 1971.
Right.
And near the end of the convention, they had some kind of wooden table, and they had a whole bunch of coverless comic books from the Golden Age for like 50 cents or $1
Oh,
each.
yeah.
And that's like catnip to me.
Oh, yeah, right.
And they had some, I picked up a few DC Supermans from the 40s, and I saw this strange thing called, with the coverless, but it was, lead feature was Mr. Monster.
Right.
Well, there was no indicia. I didn't know where it came from, what year, anything like that here, but I thought it was really cool. I think I might have picked up a couple of them, because they had a few of them
I'll
there.
copy that.
And, I just, loved it and kept, every few years I'd pull out my comics and look at it and say, boy, someone should really revive this character, do a new version of this. And then in 1983, I had been working on Elric, and the first series was finished. There was going to be a second series coming up. There was a few months in between, so I needed some work. And my publisher, Pacific Comics, was coming out with this comic called Vanguard Illustrated, which was supposed to be sort of a thing where they would get a professional cartoonist and a wannabe cartoonist, a newbie, and put them together, this and that here. And they said, come up with something and we'll see if we can, put it in this. And I was going through my comics, seeing if I could get some ideas.
Right.
And I came across this again, and I said, wait a minute, why don't I do Mr. Monster? I can reinvent him, redesign him, and I did.
Right on. Now, there were other characters in that book as well. What about Mr. Monster drew your attention as opposed to like Nelvana of the North Wind, I think was in that comic as well? So like, what about Mr. Monster hooked you? Is there some sort of primal thing? Is it something about the shadows and the goo and the blood and the terror? What is it?
Well, that splash page in particular really pulled me in. It was him. And it just seemed like such a neat, straightforward idea.
Right.
It was, relatively crude artwork, but it was very powerful at the same time. There was only one full story
Right.
with Mr. Monster before the company went under.
Right.
I just happened to see it, so that was kind of fortunate. But it had everything I liked in the comic. It had horror, and it had heroes. The only thing it really didn't have intentionally was humor.
Right.
And that was the element that I put into my version.
Right. Oh yeah, and that's actually what makes the book so incredibly readable, because a lot of times horror unto itself, it can just be like a coffee with no cream in it, just a little too strong. Sometimes you want to kick in the pants, but most of the time you just want to enjoy your beverage. And Mr. Monster is such a remarkable blend of those two things. I can't say enough about it. I've been inspired by it, actually. Well, maybe I'll just put this guy right here. So as far as it goes, do you still have that copy of Super Duper Comics #3?
I do indeed.
Oh, really?
And as a matter of fact, when I finally got to meet the creator of the original Mr. Monster back in '94, I believe, or 2004.
Fred Kelly?
Fred Kelly.
Okay.
I got him to sign my copy.
Right.
And I subsequently got a covered copy, so I have a copy with coverless and with a cover.
Nice.
We actually found Fred Kelly, because he was a missing character for years and years. We didn't know who he was, where he was, and then finally Robert Pinkham, a Canadian, found out where he was,
Right.
and invited him to a comic convention in Toronto, and invited me also.
Okay.
And I had happened to be in Ohio at the time visiting my wife's relatives, so it was actually a driving distance from that, so we arranged for us to get together. We were on a panel together.
Right.
And I had a chance to actually give him a thank you check for.
Oh, that's
for the
phenomenal. Right.
And so I was really happy to be doing that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I'm sure.
He had suffered a heart attack about a year before that, so he wasn't at full thing at that point. But he and his wife were there, and
Right.
we had breakfast with them, and it was nice. And about a year after that, he passed away. So this was a very small window of opportunity that I had a chance to meet him. It was just everything just happened to fall into place.
Right, right. That's fantastic that you had the opportunity to meet him. And was he pleased to see his character get more than one?
I think he was kind of amazed that I had done it, because I sent him a box of all the Mr. Monsters I had done. And the thing I found the funniest is when I asked him about Mr. Monster, who, Mr. Monster had started as this Doc Savage character, Doc Stern.
Yes.
And then the last issue, as they were about to go under, they changed it to Doc Stern as Mr. Monster. Well, I asked him about Mr. Monster, and he didn't remember the character at all.
Really? Oh, wow.
He had done it probably in a week 60 years previously. And
how does one forget the terror of Tresma?
I don't know.
You know what I mean?
I sure did.
Right, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, that comic is incredibly visceral. It's just like there's something about his artwork that just really punches you right in the head.
There was a scene they had in there. It was just, aside from the splash page, which I loved, there was a scene with this monster, sort of a half mummy, half grotesque here, and a scene here where he put the gun in the monster's mouth, pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
That's something you'd only see in the golden age of comics.
Right.
The golden age. So that, I said, okay, this is something I can really work with. This kind of character. I want to see if I can catch that spirit and reinvent it for the '80s, which is when I was doing this.
Right. So Bill Loebs inked your first 5 issues of Mr. Monster, or was that 6?
He worked on 5 different issues, I think.
Okay. I think that your styles mesh beautifully. And apparently you've gotten back together again?
For a couple of drawings, yeah. first time we've actually worked on Mr. Monster in 35 years. And this is kind of fun because Bill penciled one of these, and I inked it, and I penciled one, and Bill inked it, and I colored them both.
What are your future plans for Mr. Monster?
Well, initially I'm working on a couple of new Mr. Monster stories, and I'd like to get a book collection of my more recent Mr. Monster stories, which have appeared since 2014, 15, 16
Right.
in Dark Horse Presents. And I've done, put together T-shirts and things like that.
T-shirt is phenomenal.
Yeah. Here's this one in case you want to take a quick glance. No particular plans about TVs or movies or anything like that. It's,
Right.
If someone comes to me, if Spielberg comes to me with...
Right on. Have you ever been approached?
I've been approached a number of times.
Okay.
Back in the 90s, we actually came close to doing a Mr. Monster cartoon show
Right,
on
right.
ABC. And just before that, Disney bought ABC.
Okay.
And that killed that project.
Right. Well, as far as it goes, it's just the characters have such a wonderful, distinctive styling to them. I mean, they're immediately recognizable. Mr. Monster, Kelly, characters like Dr. No Zone.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like they're perfect for something like animation or even a toy line.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm amazed that no one's actually ever spoken to you about getting a toy line off the ground because they're so incredibly toyetic.
Yeah, I think people have talked about it, but they've never come through with it.
Right,
So.
right. Well, hey, if anybody out there is interested, please contact Michael and see what we can get going
Sure.
on here. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to speak to me. I'm Jason Mink for Old Guys Who Like Old Comics. Like I said, stay tuned. At the very end, you'll be able to get the link to order both of these fantastic prints. You'll also be able to speak to Michael through his Facebook account. That link is below. Follow that link. And thank you once again. I truly
Thank you, sir.
appreciate it.